Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today I was thinking, what video am I gonna make? You know, I never know what video I'm gonna make. And I was like, wait a second. You know what's a good video that I haven't made in a very, very long time? What is the proper deck setup in Wizard101? Now, the reason why I'm making this is a lot of people ask this question, and I've said a lot of times in the past, you want to make your decks pretty small as you possibly can, while still being able to kill the enemies. And a lot of people don't know exactly what the proper way to set that up is, and I figured I would go over it again and go over it in a more structured, much better video than the last video I made, which again was like 12 months ago. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so starting with the earlier levels, specifically like around level 1 to about 50, realistically, a proper deck setup isn't exactly necessary. What I consider to be a proper deck setup around this point, like from 1 to 48, this is probably going to be your deck setup, is potentially like maybe a 2-pip spell that'll probably be phased out around Dragonspire, 2 hit-alls or so, potentially maybe a Cyclops, maybe a Pixie just in case you get low, a feint or 2 at level 26, and then some blades. Now, I'm going to try to go over exactly why I have each of this in this deck, but let me tell you, this is probably what I would consider to be the average deck setup for a low level, is trying to keep it pretty decently small so that I don't, have too many cards, but not ridiculously huge. This is probably going to stop working around Dragonspire when you actually need a little bit bigger of hits, at which point you'll probably get like rank 5 spells, rank 6 spells, whatever, to actually be able to kill the enemy. So the Pixie is obviously in case you get low. The single hit like Cyclops, for example, is for you to use against a boss, and then Humungo Frog is obviously for you to use against all enemies. Once you get Humungo Frog, you're probably going to phase out Cyclops, considering they do the exact same amount of damage, except this one hits all. The blade, obviously I have a single blade for blading me up, and then I have this other blade which counts as blade stacking. I've explained in the past blade stacking. I'm not going to go too far into that. Troll is probably just like a lighter hit in case I don't kill originally, and then I have feints because obviously feint is really good. If you're a level 26 and you haven't trained feint yet, please go train it. Basically what it does is it does a plus 70 on the enemy, plus 30 to yourself. It is an amazing spell, and once you can actually feint stack in later worlds, you're going to find this spell to be really amazing. And what I usually do at early level is I come over here and fill my deck with Monstrous. And the reason for that is that would make this troll, which does 170 to 210 damage, do around 340 to about 400 or so damage, which is really good. I can't stress, like, for 2 pips, that is a lot of damage. You take this, you take Humungo Frog or whatever, that immediately goes up to 400 to around 500 damage, which is going to be insanely good. I can't stress how important Monstrous can be at lower levels, so let me quickly show you how to actually get them. So you come over here, you go to Visit Castle, you go to Top Rated. Okay, so you go to Top Rated and you come here, you find the Arcanum Apartment. As long as there's an Arcanum Apartment, you're fine. You can see here, I'm in the Arcanum Apartment. This person has way too much snow everywhere. It does look kind of cool though. And then you just turn around and leave. You can see now I am at level 42 and I'm just walking in the Arcanum. Why this is important is that you can see I have a solid 61,000 gold here. How many monsters do I have? I have 175, so I don't need 2 anymore. But I can come to Librarian Fitzhugh here, and I can actually just buy a bunch of monsters. You can see I can buy 240 monsters, which will more than last me through the game. I obviously can't buy Gargantuan. For some reason, Gargantuan is level locked, and Monstrous is not. But you can buy, like, you can see I can just buy like 60 monsters. Boom, I have Monstrous now, and that will last me entirely through the game. This is incredibly important right up until you get the actual Monstrous spell and spells at around that level. But this is probably this phase of deck setup. What's important is keeping your deck from reaching like 40-50 spells. You don't want to fill it with useless stuff like, you say, golem minions or like stunning. It's not necessary. Cleanse ward, not necessary. You want to kind of keep it small, but not too small, obviously, where you're not going to be able to kill the enemies, but not too large. Now I'm going to get into the kind of mid-tier deck setups, which are from around level 50 to around level 90 or so, around Azteca. And what these are, this is when you are going to split your deck up into 2 separate decks. I would recommend having an attack deck, and what this attack deck will do is this will serve as your mob battle deck. This is usually incredibly important for taking out mobs in a quick and concise manner. What I would recommend is having 2 blades. Obviously, you won't have a sharpened blade at this point if it is prior to Azteca, so have 2 blades just in case, have 3 enchants, and then have 2 of your 4-pip spell and 1 of your 7-pip spell. Obviously, if you are death or life and you don't have the 4-pip spell yet, you can either go for having the pet that gives you the 4-pip spell if you want, or you can just stick to having the 7-pip spell in your attack deck up until you potentially either get Ship of Fools or Rat Spin. As a life, you're going to want to try to get Rat Spin as soon as possible, so do try to get that. But this is what an average attack deck will look like. A boss deck will look something more like this. So realistically, remove King Artorias because you won't have that yet, and have like an 8-pip single attack spell. This is just in case you want to directly hit a boss. You want to have your 7-pip spell, which is what your main attacking thing is going to be. Most times you are going to use your 7-pip hit all to destroy the enemy against bosses. At this point, you probably wouldn't have your shadow, or you wouldn't have your shadow spell. So what I recommend doing is probably having 2 of the 7-pip hit alls, and then I have the 4-pip hit all just in case you don't kill and you want to do a light hit. You probably want 2 blades and then a feint. And at this point, this is really important, is you want to try to get the Jewel of the Feint from the Bazaar so you can feint stack. You're going to be able to do that plus 75, plus 20, and then the plus 70, plus 30. This is really important for every boss. Super important, super useful to have, super useful to know. This is obviously a pretty clean deck setup from around 50 to around 100. Obviously, you won't have some of the spells at level 50, like an 8-pip single hit, but you will have the 7-pip spells, which is more than enough for a boss deck at that point. And once you can get the 8-pip single hit spell, that's when you're going to want to add it. What's important to know, my deck setups are based around one thing and one thing only, and that is the size of your deck and the size of your starting hand. So what I design my decks to do, I want it so that I can be as efficient as possible. I don't want to waste rounds discarding things and removing things from my deck. So, for example, your starting hand, I believe, is 7 cards, I think. It might be 9. I'm pretty sure it's 7, though. That means that, at worst, say I start with 4 enchants, a blade, another blade, and then a feint. That would mean I don't have my attack hand. Well, luckily, at that point, I can just blade around. I'm not wasting that round discarding anything. And then next round, I'll have a hit that I can enchant and then potentially blade again or feint. My point is that you never want to be wasting a round. You want to be wasting as few rounds as possible. And I remember as a kid, I used to massively fill up my decks to the point where I would have hundreds of spells in them and I would just discard. Like, I would spam right click, discard any card I don't need. That is not the way to do it. That is super inefficient, super unhelpful, and genuinely, it will make a battle take so much longer. So please try to keep your decks as small as possible. Now we're entering the late game phase. This is what I would consider post Azteca once you get Sharpened Blade, Potent Trap. This is when you start having multiple decks. You can see, okay, my death is a little bit excessive. I don't think I have a single other wizard that has as many decks as my death does. My death, you can see, has a full page of decks. This is simply just because I do a lot of different setups. So you can see, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. My attack deck is obviously for mob enemies. My Monstrology deck is for bad juju spamming. My support deck is for detritus runs and support. My dungeon deck is for Malastare, specifically in Darkmoor. My monster deck was for Shane Von Shane in Darkmoor. This Deathly Liaisons deck was for, oh, who was that for? I don't remember actually who this is for. This could be for literally anyone, maybe Yevgeny or something. The Hierarch's Horror deck is for farming Stallion Quartermain and the last final boss of Lemuria. And then obviously you have my boss deck. That was a little bit of a distraction, but whatever. This is what a top tier deck is going to look like. From about level 90 to about 150, this is what your attack deck is going to look like. Very, very similar to a deck that I had in the past. The only difference is I have Call of Cthulhu here. Obviously, if you don't have a hit all shadow spell that is around this pip range, I would probably just switch it in for the 7-pip spell. I might want to switch it in for the 7-pip spell anyway, just in case. But I have 2 Ship of Fools here. I got the 3 enchants, and then I have 1 Sharpened Blade, 1 Death Blade. This means, so say you start with a hand of 7, you can see there is not a single chance that I will ever not be able to cast Ship of Fools first round. So you can see if I start with all 6 of these first spells, I'll still have the 7th Ship of Fools. That is what my decks are designed to do, is so that you don't waste that round passing. A boss deck, on the other hand, what I like to do is I like to keep it to around 4 hits, 4 enchants, and then I have a potent trap, 2 feints, a sharpened blade, and 2 blades. This is so I can blade stack, feint stack, and then obviously have hits. At worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario, and I start with all enchants, I still have that 7th slot so I can enchant something. This is so that I'm not wasting a single round doing anything. So how exactly I set this up? Obviously, I have feint stack and blade stacking. As for the spells, I have King Artorias as my main hit against an enemy in case I'm doing a single enemy. I have Scarecrow, which is going to be what I'm using against most bosses everywhere. A 7-pip AoE is incredibly useful. Then I have a Call of Cthulhu in case I get that Shadow Pip, in which case I'll use it over Scarecrow because it does a little bit more damage. And then finally, I have Headless Horseman, and this is in case something like doesn't die, or I need to remove shields, something like that. Some kind of setup where it does quite a bit of damage, and it only costs a little bit of pips. In this case, if you don't have, obviously, Headless Horseman is death specific. If you are another school, I would probably just use your 4-pip AoE in place of this. That's probably what I would do. I used to have Ship of Fools here until I got Headless Horseman. It's just a nice, small, quaint little deck that is incredibly useful. So that is really an overview of it. What are the exceptions to this? Because obviously there are exceptions. If there is a boss that has a lot of cheats, and specific cheats that either remove blades, remove traps, obviously you're going to have to adjust your deck to it. That is incredibly important. Huge major bosses like Malastare or like the Trident are going to need their own, either their own decks or are going to need a complete revamp of your deck. This is what my death did. Obviously, I have this deck, which is my deck for Malastare, which is a little bit bigger because the Malastare fight is much, much longer. I would click out these things for my deck. They were only there because I've changed wands and boots since. But you can see this is a much bigger deck. And then my Monstrology deck, which is my Juju spamming deck. I have this for the Trident. This is in case I ever need to Juju spam. Obviously, you have your own roles. You have your own type of decks that you might need to set up for specific bosses. I would definitely recommend looking up major bosses before you fight them to see their cheats. Obviously, that's the exception. But these two decks right here, what I just did, these deck setups, are going to carry you through the entire game. Like, I rarely ever change these decks at all. Like, the only time I really change a deck is my boss deck, and that is in case a boss has a cheat that will remove, like, blades or traps. Like, you can see, for example, my Lemuria farming deck for the final boss, the 8 bosses, I don't have any feints because obviously they're removed. And then I have this here to remove the minus 10% or they put around you. If it's a unique fight, you want to change it. Otherwise, no. But that's really it. I hope I've taught you something today, whether it be the proper way to set up a deck or exactly how like a deck setup should be. The most important part about a deck setup for me is making sure that that first round, you want to minimize your chance of not being able to do anything for a few rounds. If you get a bad pull, you don't want it so that you're discarding for 30 rounds to try to find the hit. As a kid, I did the exact same thing. Like, trust me, if you are filling your decks up to the maximum and you think that's the way to go, don't feel guilty about it. I literally did the same thing right up until like 2016, 2017, when I finally discovered that that's not the way to go. Trust me, I feel like everyone at one point in their life just filled up their deck with useless spells. But that's it for today. Hopefully this is useful. Let me know. Do you have any recommendations in the comments below for deck setup specifically in case you feel like I missed something? Let me know. But otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.